All right, Alexander, we have the UK Foreign Minister and the UK Defence Minister, Liz Truss and Wallace, and they have met with their counterparts, Lavrov for Truss, Shoigu for Wallace. And from what I understand, the meeting did not go well. I believe that Lavrov has come out to say that he's very unhappy. I'm paraphrasing. He's very unhappy with the outcome of the meeting. Um, I don't think this should be a surprise or a shock to anybody. I think
No.
there's a lot of differences between Russia and the UK at this moment. What is what is your read on what's going on? If everyone everyone may remember Liz Truss from her interview on the BBC where she confused the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. So anyway,
Indeed,
just to frame it as to
indeed,
who Liz Truss is. Okay.
indeed, and I would add, by the way, that the very first thing she did when she was in Moscow. I mean, not the first thing, but one of the things she did when she was in Moscow, is that of course she had herself photographed in Red Square in front of St. Basil's Cathedral in a nice fur hat. I mean, as if she was a tourist. Rather odd behaviour if you're on a diplomatic mission at a time, when supposedly war is pending. I mean, it's a very strange move, I have to say. But anyway, there she is. She's in Moscow. Ben Wallace, who is, I think, I'm going to say it straightforwardly, I find him a more likable person, though equally disconnected from reality in some ways, was meeting Shoigu. The mystery to me, the real puzzle about all of this is why the Russians agreed to meet these people at all. Because, I mean, Lavrov and Shoigu are presumably extremely busy people. You would have thought that, they wouldn't want to waste time listening to Liz Truss and Ben Wallace coming up with exactly the same talking points which you get every day if you go to the British media. I mean, all you have to do is listen to the BBC or read the Guardian or the Times or the Financial Times or the Telegraph here. You know exactly what these people are going to say. And of course, Lavrov and Shoigu can respond to them. They can make all the relevant points to them. They can explain. I mean, one of the points that Lavrov made, I mean, he was, apparently they were talking about, all these Russian troops in Russia. It's absolutely unacceptable that they're there, and that they need to go back to their barracks. And apparently Lavrov said to Truss, well, look, when our troops finish their exercises, they always go back to barracks. When you deploy troops to places like the Baltic states, they tend to stay there. So you are lecturing us about asking us to do something we anyway do, but which you don't do yourselves. It's the kind of point, of course, that neither Liz Truss nor Ben Wallace are going to understand. I mean, I really mean that. I don't think they'd understand it. It would just wash completely over their heads. They wouldn't really grasp what it was all about. So it's an absolute case of two very powerful people, very clever people, Lavrov and Shoigu, wasting their time with two British officials who, frankly, have nothing interesting to say or useful to say, and who are there for essentially a PR exercise.
You have a very hard time. We did this in a past video, understanding the UK's motivation in all of this. I just don't understand why the UK just doesn't sit this one out, because it doesn't seem like they have anything to add or to gain in this fake, Russia's going to invade Ukraine narrative that the Biden White House has concocted. We did a video the other day where we pretty much come to the understanding and the conclusion that this is all about Nord Stream 2. And I really believe at this moment in time that the U.S. will do something to start some sort of I don't want to say conflict. They're gonna take some action to try and provoke a reaction from Russia. What that action is going to be, I don't know. Is it going to be so large and so devastating that it's going to force Putin's hand to do something, or will the Russians be able to show restraint or to figure asymmetric ways to work around that provocation that the U.S. has planned? I say that because of what Mitch McConnell pretty much said, which to me signaled that they don't even care anymore what Olaf Scholz says about Nord Stream 2. McConnell just came out and said it. He just
Absolutely,
said,
indeed.
The German, the chancellor told me that if Russia invades Ukraine, he's going to cancel Nord Stream 2. I mean, he just bypassed Olaf Scholz completely and said, we already have the information from the German chancellor. Yeah. Where am I going with this? Real quick, I know you want to weigh in on what I've just said as well, Mitch McConnell and those statements. Yeah. Where am I going with this? Is the UK's angle, perhaps, this may be a stretch on my part, but is their angle perhaps the understanding that once they manage to provoke Russia, or hopefully they manage to provoke Russia to invade Ukraine, that will lead to the cancellation of Nord Stream 2, which in effect for the UK means it will weaken Europe, the EU in essence, or Europe in general. And from a UK standpoint, maybe they're seeing this as, you know what, that's beneficial to us. A weaker Europe at this moment in time is exactly what we need in order to strengthen our position. I mean, may that be an angle of interest for the UK in all of this?
The British have consistently spoken out against Nord Stream 2. But here I have to say, I mean, they need to be particularly careful what they wish for, because, of course, if Nord Stream 2 is cancelled, if there is an energy crisis in Europe, it has now become absolutely crystal clear that Britain is connected to the European energy mix. And this fiction that Britain does not import Russian gas, this winter that's been proved to be completely untrue. You still see this fiction promoted in the media here, but the reality is that in April we're going to see our gas prices, surge even further. So if this is some sort of complicated strategy to try to weaken Europe by denying the Europeans the access to Russian gas, well, the price is going to be paid by British consumers, and I can't honestly see how that benefits Johnson or the Conservatives or indeed any part of Britain's political class at all. But you point to something
maybe before you go on,
yeah,
maybe weaken Europe on a geopolitical level then, and on an energy level. Would that be an
well,
angle?
I think there may be something to this, but I mean, I think that you're right to make a fundamental point. What is Britain's game here? I mean, you can see an American game. You're absolutely right. The Americans have an interest in stopping Nord Stream 2 being turned on. I mean, from their point of view, they're not directly affected. If Nord Stream 2 doesn't come into operation, well, the United States produces its own natural gas. It doesn't import gas from Russia on any big scale. They're not affected. So it strengthens their geopolitical position. In Europe, it interrupts economic connections between Russia and Europe, ultimately also, by the way, between China and Europe too. It increases US economic influence in Europe. It does all those things. And your point about Mitch McConnell coming out about that is absolutely on the ball, actually. It's on the point, because here we see Scholz possibly telling something to McConnell in private. And McConnell comes out and says what Scholz supposedly told him in private, but which, of course, Scholz was not prepared to say in public. I mean, here we have McConnell, the Americans, and this is obviously coordinated, the Americans, in other words, disclosing private discussions that they have with the Germans. And, if anybody had any doubt up to this point that this is to a large extent about Nord Stream 2, I think the fact that McConnell came out that way, I think that should put that to rest completely. They are trying to box the Germans into cancelling Nord Stream 2. They're trying to get something to happen so that the Germans cancel Nord Stream 2. The Germans are still resisting, perhaps not very effectively, but they still are resisting. But you see how ruthlessly some people in Washington, like McConnell, like Bob Menendez, who also had a private meeting with Scholz, we see how ruthlessly they're prepared to act. And the only thing, in my opinion, that is preventing some kind of incident happening in eastern Ukraine is that Zelensky and the Ukrainians don't want to do it because they don't want to be destroyed. And that's the only thing that stands in the way of this now. Anyway, coming back to the British, you can see that the Americans have a strategy. You may not like it, you may think it's wholly wrong, you might think it's counterproductive, you may feel it will backfire, but at least it's a strategy. What are the British trying to achieve by all of this? It's not easy to see. Do they? Obviously, they don't want to see, well, they say they don't want to see Nord Stream 2 completed, but as I said, there would be big economic consequences for Britain if something like that were to happen, and if there were to be an energy crisis in Europe. So what is it exactly that the British are trying to do? Well, I can't help but think that ever since Donald Trump left the presidency on the 20th of January 2021, the British government has been frenetically trying to make itself appear relevant around the world. So we see all these very bizarre moves. They're trying to win over the support of the Biden administration. They're trying to get them to make themselves look like they're important and useful to the Americans. So we see them sending frigates close to Sevastopol. We see them sending aircraft carriers to the South China Sea. We see them talking about sending troops to Estonia. And we see them talking up this story about some kind of massive military confrontation with the Russians in Eastern Europe. And it's, I think, more than anything else, a massive desire to look important and to try to insert themselves into this diplomatic dialogue in which, to be straightforward about it, the British look like bit players. They don't look like they're important at all. I mean, contrast Macron's visit to Russia and his massive meeting with Putin, his 6 hours of discussions with Putin, his visits to Ukraine, his attempts to organize negotiations. Contrast that also with Scholz's forthcoming visit to Moscow next week. Contrast that too with the diplomacy that's going on between the Americans and the Russians, these exchanges of letters, the strong likelihood that we're going to have another summit meeting. Apparently, Biden wants to meet Putin again. And the British are desperate to make themselves important, look important again. And at the same time, they want to persuade the Americans that they are important so that they can get the goodwill of the Biden administration and try to refloat this big trade deal which Trump was working towards, but which Biden has shown no interest in.
That was going to be my question. I understand. I can understand the desire of the UK government, the Boris Johnson government, to try and win some favor from the Biden White House after Trump exited. But I was still struggling to see what are the practical things that the Boris Johnson government may gain from courting the Biden administration. And now, you mentioned that perhaps if the UK does all of this and shows their support for Biden's ridiculous plan to cancel Nord Stream 2, maybe they'll finally get a trade deal with the Biden White House. And that may be a possibility because what we are seeing, in essence, we are seeing the Anglosphere represented by the UK and the US, and Canada to a lesser degree, but Canada has its own issues right now. You're seeing that bloc go up against France and Germany, in essence, but France in particular. I mean, this is the battle that we're really seeing play out right now,
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
Russia against Ukraine. Right now, the battle is the US with the UK, sitting around, following what the US is doing, going up against France with Germany, trying to figure out how do we get out of this mess? How do we
Absolutely.
prevent war?
I think that's exactly right. I think this is exactly what the whole story is about. I don't think anybody really believes there's going to be a war, a real war between Ukraine and Russia. This is all a struggle between the European court, France, Germany, Italy, the Carolinian Corps, as it's sometimes referred to, and the Anglo-Americans. And the British want to make the Americans know and feel that they are 100% with them, that they are, if you like, even more royalist than the king. And that's what this is all about, it seems to me, that they want to persuade the Americans that in this kind of confrontation, whom can you rely on? You can't rely on the Germans, you can't rely on the French, you can rely on us. So please, please, please give us that big trade deal that Donald Trump was promising us. Now, whether, by the way, Biden and the people around him are going to actually do that, I still get the impression that Biden doesn't particularly care for Boris. I mean, and we've recently learned there's been this leak about what Biden thinks of world leaders, and it comes across as a really, actually, I have to say this, a rather nasty man, frankly. I mean, nothing good to say about anybody as far as I can see. But whether Biden really wants to come to some kind of deal with the British, whether he'll just accept the British loyalty and ignore it, I really don't know. But that's, I think, the British strategy at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with you. It does paint Biden as a very nasty person, but it fits. I believe this leak because the things that he said about it. I think he talked badly about Macron, about Schultz, about Boris Johnson, about Putin, and who else was? I think those are the four.
Even Angela Merkel. Even Angela Merkel.
And Merkel, yeah. It really does fit his character.
Yeah,
what the leak says Biden said about them really fits the person we've seen the last year in office.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
it's just a nasty guy.
Nasty guy, and apparently, and also, by the way, it also shows something else: his extraordinary vanity. I mean, we've always known what a vain man, what a conceited man Obama is. Turns out Biden is just as bad at that in that regard. But anyway, putting that aside, I mean, it's, I think, problematic whether the British will get this big trade deal. And to be straightforward about it, I think they're going about this completely in the wrong way anyway. But that is, it seems to me, probably, if you want to find some kind of strategy or some kind of method behind all of this, that, it seems to me, is what this is all about. And, so you try and make yourself relevant, you try and make yourself important, you try and persuade the Europeans that you're a player, because the British were very, very shocked when the Minsk agreement was brokered by the Germans and the French back in February 2015, and they weren't even consulted. So, that they want to show the Europeans that they matter, that they're consequential, that they're relevant. They want to persuade the Americans that they're loyal and that they're on side. And so they do all of these things, which, as I said, I think, as far as the Russians are concerned, it's just annoying and just means that the British are buzzing around, but it doesn't really amount to anything of any significance at all. Now, that still leaves open the question of why the Russians played along with this, why the Russians wanted to talk to the British or agreed to talk to the British, why busy people like Lavrov and Shoigu gave up part of their time for meetings with people like Ben Wallace and Liz Truss. And I don't really know the answer to that, but it is the Russian tradition that you talk to everybody, and I presume that's ultimately what it was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to keep on playing the game and to keep on playing this this dance. Boy, putting your trust and faith in Biden. I don't know what to say about this move from Boris Johnson.
The other thing,
time will tell. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I mean, the other thing is, I mean, Ukraine could tell you. I mean, Zelensky could tell you at the moment how manipulative Biden is, how manipulative this administration is, because they're trying to use Ukraine as a counter, as a chess piece in a game to stop Nord Stream 2 against essentially the French and the Germans. And of course, if they're prepared to do that to Ukraine, if they're prepared to use Ukraine as a chess piece, they could do the same to Britain. This is not
Yeah, absolutely.
a fully reliable, faithful ally. I mean, it's not
Yeah, absolutely.
Roosevelt
I
and
mean, the
Truman.
U.S.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Roosevelt, Truman.
I mean, it's not Roosevelt or Truman or Kennedy or anybody. I mean, Eisenhower. It's not that kind of relationship anymore. Reagan and Thatcher. It isn't that kind of relationship.
Yeah, after listening to McConnell's statement, I'm positive as night follows day that the media is going to start to get the narrative out there that that Germany has pretty much stated that if Russia invades Ukraine, they're going to cancel Nord Stream 2. They're going
Oh,
to
of
get
course,
that narrative out there,
of course,
and
of
then
course.
I think it's pretty much set in stone that a provocation is going to happen, and I'm sure they've already
Absolutely.
planned out what that provocation is.
Yeah.
The only question I have is once again I go back to my intro: how big of a provocation will it be, and will the provocation be enough in order to force Putin's hand to act against Ukraine? Because we also got to remember that Russia is very good at asymmetric responses. We saw that with Turkey when they shot down the plane. But Putin is also a politician, and he doesn't have unlimited political capital. And if the provocation is devastating enough, people in Russia will expect Putin to act, very much in the case of, say, Georgia, for example. I mean, if it is
Absolutely.
that big of a provocation, Putin will have to act in order to keep his political position. That's the only
Well,
question
indeed.
mark in my
Well, indeed.
mind
Well,
at
indeed.
this moment.
You're absolutely right. The big question is this: will the Ukrainian side hold? When there's a report in the Wall Street Journal about how Zelensky has had it up to there with Biden, apparently. So the Americans and the Ukrainians are furious with each other. But of course, you can always find ways around that. You can get some commander, maybe the commander of the Azov battalion, to do something, for example. You can do, or you can arrange something in Kiev. And it's now become clear how heavy the lobbying was to stop Poroshenko being arrested when he arrived in Ukraine. Christopher Freeland and Justin Trudeau were on the phone, working the phones to protect Poroshenko, and so was Blinken. So
Because he's going to take over.
well, exactly. So you bring in Poroshenko. He starts something. But that could be the plan. By the way, I think, as we've said already, I think it's a dangerous plan. And the danger is that if you do that, if you organize some kind of crisis in Kiev, which results in Zelensky being shunted aside in that kind of way, it's not impossible the whole Ukrainian house of cards could collapse. I mean, the country is now very close to default. Apparently, it can't borrow. Insurers will not cover Ukrainian debt. So that makes borrowing impossible. The situation is under an enormous squeeze at the moment. So, there's all sorts of variables and uncertainties here. But, bear something in mind. Even if the United States cannot get a provocation going, even if it can't get a war between Russia and Ukraine going, they might still block Nord Stream 2 or try to block Nord Stream 2 by imposing sanctions. They could say, that the threats from Russia to Ukraine are so extreme that it simply isn't acceptable that this pipeline should be built, and they could take a step like that. It would go down very badly in Germany if they did that, which is why they want to create this incident. But, they might still do it. It's not impossible that they will do it. And in fact, if they don't get their provocation, I'd say the odds are that they will do it. So it's we've got to remember that Nord Stream 2 is now hanging by a thread. It's not, the odds have to be against this pipeline starting operation over the next few weeks. I'm not months. It's not definite yet, but that's the way it's looking. But that's the game, it seems to me, that's being played, and the British are trying to play along with it. And of course, the great danger is that, you know, if you're very little and you find yourself in the if you insert yourself into the battle of the giants, the risk is you get trampled. And the way Britain could get trampled is not through a war, heavens forbid we get anything like that, but we could have an energy crisis in Europe. Energy costs in Britain could explode, and that could create a political crisis in Britain as well. So that's the risk. It's a huge risk that the British are running.
Yeah. All right. So let's put a pause here and let's talk a little bit more about this, Alexander, and let's talk about NATO expansion in Slovakia.